Cultural growth in the ancient society between 600 BCE to 600 CE. The era from 6th century BCE to 6th century CE brought several socio-religious changes in the early societies, which was mainly influenced by the Brahminical thoughts and ideas. Division of classes as per their varnas and occupations gave rise to complex and complicated caste structures. Several written texts and the art architecture of that period gives us a vivid description of this era, which witnessed the emergence of several cultures, religions, and traditions. The rise of new religions. Buddhism and Jainism were the prominent religions among others, which emerged in the beginning of the 6th century BCE. We have vivid accounts of these religions, their philosophies, and thoughts through Buddhist, Jain, and Brahminical texts. An impressive body of work done in the form of monuments and inscriptions are also the prominent sources of information. Let us begin by exploring the background of the early Buddhist and Jain traditions. The mid of the 1st century BCE is often regarded as a turning point in the entire world history, as it saw the emergence of thinkers such as Zarathustra in Iran, Kongzi in China, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle in Greece, and Mahavira and Gautam Buddha among many others in India. During this time, early India was witnessing massive changes in socio-religious lives of people, especially near the Ganga Valley. The societies were under the influence of Brahmins, who were the followers of early Vedas. They perused the kings or chiefs to implement various rules, norms, rituals, and religious practices. One such commonly performed ritual was the practice of sacrifices for prosperity, good health, wealth, etc. The most popular example of it was the Ashwamedha Yagna performed by kings or chiefs for supremacy. The Brahmins were the only assigned class who were entitled to conduct such rituals and ceremonies. Brahmins, along with the Kshatriyas, became the dominating classes with the rise of the caste structure, which divided the classes in 4 varnas and various jatis. The rise of new thoughts and philosophies giving birth to new religions. From 6th century BCE onwards, there was speculation among the people about these Vedic ideas and thoughts propagated by the Brahmins. There were the lines of philosophers and scholars who started questioning the authority of the Vedas, the validity of their theories on rebirth, division of classes as per their varnas, and the significance of the sacrificial traditions and other rituals. As mentioned in the Buddhist texts, there were about 64 such schools of thought led by these philosophers. The debates among these scholars and teachers were held in various places where they tried to convince each other as well as the ordinary layman about the validity of their philosophies and thoughts. Such discussions took place in the Kuta Grahashala, or a hut with a pointed roof. Those philosophers who succeeded in convincing the other scholars, the followers of the latter, became his disciples. Among these lines of teachers were Mahavira and the Buddha too. They preached in karma, which suggested that men and women could strive to attain liberation from the trials and tribulations of worldly existence by their deeds and not by birth, as were mentioned in the Vedas. Let's know more about Jainism and Buddhism. Jainism is one of the oldest religions in the world. Jains traditionally trace their history through a succession of 24 propagators of their faith, known as Tirthankara, with Adinatha as the first Tirthankara and Mahavira as the last of the current era. Mahavira united the old branch of the Jain ideology and the new one. Jainism prescribes and preaches a path of non-violence towards all living beings and emphasizes spiritual independence and equality between all forms of life. Jain practitioners believe that non-violence and self-control are the means by which they can obtain liberation. Gradually, Jainism spread to many parts of India. Like the Buddhists, Jain scholars produced a wealth of literature which were written in Prakrit, Sanskrit, and Tamil. For centuries, manuscripts of these texts were carefully preserved in libraries attached to the temples. Some of the earliest stone sculptures associated with religious traditions were produced by devotees of the Jain Tirthankaras and have been recovered from several sites throughout the subcontinent. Buddha and his teachings. One of the most influential religions of that time was Buddhism, which evolved in the 6th century BCE. It was founded by Lord Buddha, who was born as Siddhartha Gautam in the Sakya clan in Lumbini, which is in present-day Nepal. Buddhism spread from the northeastern region of the Indian subcontinent through the Central, East, and Southeast Asia. After asceticism and meditation, Siddhartha Gautama discovered the path of enlightenment, which means away from the extremes of self-indulgence and mortification. He attained this under a Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, which is in Bihar. Gautama from then on was also known as the Enlightened One or the Samyaksha Sambuddha. Buddha taught Dhamma or the path of righteous living, which mainly preached on respect towards elders, kindness, or following the path of ahimsa towards others, attaining self-realization and nirvana. Lord Buddha regarded the social world as the creation of humans rather than of divine origin. Therefore, he advised kings and rulers to be humane and ethical. Individual effort was expected to transform social relations. The Buddha emphasized individual agency and righteous action as the means to escape from the cycle of rebirth and attain self-realization and nirvana. Let us review now the Buddhist text which gives a vivid account of Buddha's teachings. None of the Buddha's speeches were written down during his lifetime. After his death in 5th or the 4th century BCE, his teachings were compiled by his disciples at Vaishali, which is in present-day Bihar. These compilations were known as Tipitaka, which had 3 categories of texts. The Vinaya Pitaka includes rules and regulations for those who join the Sangha or the monastic order. Sutta Pitakas mentioned the Buddha's teachings, and the Abhidhamma Pitaka dealt with philosophical matters. As Buddhism traveled to new regions such as Sri Lanka, other texts such as the Dipavamsha and the Mahavamsha were written. They contained regional histories of Buddhism. Many of these works contain biographies of the Buddha. Some of the oldest texts are in Pali, while later compositions are in Sanskrit. Buddhist texts were preserved in manuscript for several centuries in monasteries in different parts of Asia. Modern translations have been prepared from Pali, Sanskrit, Chinese, and the Tibetan texts. Who were the followers of Buddha? With due course of time, there grew a body of disciples of the Buddha, which resulted in laying the foundation of the Sangha. Sangha was an organization of monks who, like Buddha too, became teachers of Dhamma. These monks lived simply, possessing only the essential requisites for survival, such as a bowl to receive food once a day from the public. They were known as bhikkhus. Initially, only men were allowed into the Sangha, but later, women also came to be admitted. The Buddha's foster mother, Mahapajapati Gautami, was the first woman to be ordained as a bhikkhuni. Many women who entered the Sangha became teachers of Dhamma and went on to become theris, or respected women who had attained liberation. The Buddha's followers came from all sections of social groups. Once within the Sangha, all were regarded as equal. Internal functioning of the Sangha was based on the traditions of Ganas and Sanghas, where consensus was arrived at through discussions. Buddhism grew rapidly both during the lifetime of the Buddha and after his death, as it appealed to many people dissatisfied with existing religious practices and confused by the rapid social changes taking place around them. What were stupas and their significance in Buddhist religion? In Buddhism, a stupa is a commemorative building usually housing sacred relics associated with important saintly figures. Stupas have a very distinctive semi-spherical shape and are made of unburned bricks, often surrounded by a stone fence. They contain a circular platform in the center of which there is a small place for a receptacle containing different relics. Traditionally, stupas contained mainly ashes of saintly persons, but they can also contain other relics such as personal items. Stupas have 4 entrance gates, which symbolize the connection of the stupa with the 4 quarters of the world and emphasizes the universal spirit of Buddhism. Why stupas were built? Some Buddhist accounts claim that when the Buddha passed away, his followers divided his relics, including his cremated remains, into 8 portions. These relics were distributed to different kingdoms within India, and stupas were erected over them to honor the Buddha's memory. The Indian Emperor Ashoka the Great redistributed the relics during the 3rd century BCE. The intention was to ensure the protection of the Buddha all across his empire. This legend, along with many others, helped the stupa to become a signature icon of Buddhism. The stupas are also considered a place of meditation in addition to their traditional meaning as commemorative monuments. What were the different types of stupas? Built for a variety of reasons, Buddhist stupas are classified based on form and function into 5 types. Relic stupa, in which the relics or remains of the Buddha, his disciples, and saints are interred. Object stupa, in which the items interred are objects belonging to the Buddha or his disciples, such as a begging bowl or robe or important Buddhist scriptures. Commemorative stupa, built to commemorate events in the lives of the Buddha or his disciples. Symbolic stupa, to symbolize aspects of Buddhist theology. For example, Borobudur is considered to be the symbol of the 3 worlds, Dhatu, and the spiritual stages, Bhumi, in a Mahayana Bodhisattva's character. Votive stupa, which is constructed to commemorate visits or to gain spiritual benefits, usually at the site of prominent stupas which are regularly visited. The stupa at Sanchi. The best preserved monuments of this time is the stupa at Sanchi in present-day Bhopal. It is one of the most wonderful structure of its time. In the 19th century, this structure was preserved by Shah Jahan Begum, the ruler of Bhopal. This stupa is one of the most important Buddhist centers, which stands as a testimony to the successful restoration and preservation of a key archaeological site by the Archaeological Survey of India. The Great Stupa is the oldest structure and was originally commissioned by the Emperor Ashoka the Great in the 3rd century BC. Its nucleus was a hemispherical brick structure built over the relics of the Buddha. A pillar of finely polished sandstone was also erected. The old stupa was later covered when it was expanded. It is one of the most important places of Buddhist pilgrimage, and the tradition claims that it was built over the relics of the Buddha, including a portion of his cremated remains. Let's now know about the sculptures of the Buddha. One of the most interesting features of all the sculptures in Sanchi is that it lacks the figure of Buddha in human form. He is represented through symbols of wheels, footprints, or thorn. According to hagiographies or holy biographic books, the Buddha attained enlightenment while meditating under a tree. The empty seat was meant to indicate the meditation of the Buddha, and the stupa was meant to represent the salvation. Another frequently used symbol was the wheel. This stood for the first sermon of the Buddha delivered at Sarnath. Other sculptures connected to Buddhism were, at Sanchi, beautiful women swinging from the edge of the gateway holding onto a tree. That it could be a representation of what is described, a woman whose touch caused trees to flower and bear fruit. It is likely that this was regarded as an auspicious symbol and integrated into the decoration of the stupa. This motif, however, suggests that many people who turned to Buddhism enriched it with their own pre-Buddhist and even non-Buddhist beliefs, practices, and ideas. While the Jatakas contain several animal stories that are depicted at Sanchi, it is likely that many of these animals were carved to create lively scenes to draw viewers. Also, animals were often used as symbols of human attributes. Elephants, for example, were depicted to signify strength and wisdom. Another motif is that of a woman surrounded by lotuses and elephants, which seem to be sprinkling water on her as if performing an abhisheka or consecration. While some historians identify the figure as Maya, who was the mother of the Buddha, others identify her with the popular goddess Gajalakshmi, literally which means the goddess of good fortune. A new religious tradition which originated from Buddhism was the development of Mahayana Buddhism. By the 1st century CE, there is evidence of changes in Buddhist ideas and practices. Early Buddhist teachings had given great importance to self-effort or realization in achieving nirvana. But there emerged another sect who wanted to be saviors. They referred to themselves as Mahayana, who believed in bodhisattvas. The word bodhisattva means enlightened being, who work for the enlightenment of all beings and not just for themselves. They vow not to enter nirvana until all beings enter nirvana together. The worship of images of the Buddha and bodhisattvas became an important part of this tradition, which was not prevalent among early Buddhists. Those who adopted Mahayana's beliefs described the early followers as Hinayana. The growth of Puranic Hinduism, which was one of the most prominent religions of that period. The Brahmanism of the Dharma Shastras and the Smritis underwent a radical transformation at the hands of the Purana composers, resulting in the rise of Puranic Hinduism. It soon came to overshadow all existing religions. Puranic Hinduism was a multiplex belief system which grew and expanded as it absorbed and synthesized many ideas and cultic traditions. Many local religions and traditions were assimilated into Puranic Hinduism. Vishnu and Shiva emerged as the main deities, together with Shakti. Vaishnavism subsumed the cults of Narayana, Jagannath, Venkateshwara, and many others. Rama and Krishna became the focus of a strong bhakti tradition, which found expression particularly in the Bhagavata Purana. The Shaivism absorbed local cults by suffixing of Isha or Ishvara to the name of the local deity. For example, Bhuteshwara, Hatakeshwara, and Chandeshwara. Vishnu was one way of creating a more unified religious tradition. Some of these forms were represented in sculptures, as were other deities. Shiva, for instance, was symbolized by the linga, although he was occasionally represented in human form too. The sculptures reveal stories behind them, which are mentioned in the Puranas, compiled by Brahmanas in the middle of the first millennium CE. Puranas were written in simple Sanskrit verse and were meant to be read aloud to everybody, including women and Shudras, who did not have access to Vedic learning. Puranas is basically an assemblage of ideas, thoughts, and beliefs of various priests, merchants, and ordinary men and women who travel from place to place, sharing their ideas and beliefs. For instance, Krishna was an important deity in the Mathura region. However, over centuries, his worship spread to other parts of the country as well. The influence of Puranic Hinduism enhanced to such an extent that in later centuries, the Buddha started to be replaced by Hindu gods in pujas. Building of temples gained its memento in this period. In the same time as stupas at sites such as Sanchi, the temples to house images of gods and goddesses were also being built elsewhere. The early temple was a small square room called the Garbhagriha, with a single doorway for the worshipper to enter and offer worship to the image. Gradually, a tall structure known as the Shikara was built over the central shrine. Temple walls were often decorated with sculptures. Later temples became far more elaborate, with assembly halls, huge walls and gateways, etc. One of the unique features of early temples was that some of these were hollowed out of huge rocks as artificial caves. The tradition of building artificial caves was an old one. Some of the earliest of these were constructed in the 3rd century BCE on the orders of Ashoka for renouncers who belonged to the Ajivika sect. This tradition evolved through various stages and culminated much later in the 8th century in the carving out of an entire temple. It is quite likely that many rituals, religious beliefs and practices were not recorded in a permanent state, as this period was undergoing vibrant traditions of religious activities and philosophical ideas. Summary: during 600 BCE to 600 CE, Brahminical thoughts and ideas, division of classes as per their varnas and occupations, gave rise to a complex caste structure. New religions like Buddhism and Jainism flourished. Buddha taught Dhamma, or the path of righteous living, which mainly preached on respect towards elders, kindness, or following the path of ahimsa towards others, attaining self-realization and nirvana. Jainism prescribes and preaches a path of non-violence towards all living beings and emphasizes spiritual independence and equality between all forms of life. Stupas in Buddhism signify teachings of the Buddha. They are supposed to have been erected over the remnants of the Buddha. Stupa at Sanchi is a sacred place for all Buddhism followers. Mahayanas emerged as a new section in Buddhism as a result of the emergence of another sect who wanted to be saviors. They referred to themselves as Mahayana, who believed in bodhisattvas. The worship of images of the Buddha and bodhisattvas became an important part of this tradition, which was not prevalent among early Buddhists. The early Buddhist followers were known as Hinayana. Growth of Puranic Hinduism in this time was a result of Puranic literature, beliefs, and narrations and traditions. They absorbed and synthesized many ideas and cultic traditions. There was a rise in temple building culture reflecting many facets of divinity, beliefs, and traditions.